Today I want to tell you the story of how I became a pastor. I graduated from seminary last year, a full year ago. And Sarah and I had actually decided to become missionaries. Our goal was to go overseas. We were considering South Korea, Vietnam, Istanbul. And so I told the church, the United Methodist Church, don't put me in a church. Don't place me. I'm going to go overseas. I really thought we were going to go overseas. But then God closed all of those doors. It was the strangest thing. We got some rejections. I didn't have enough experience. One program actually turned out to be something completely different than what they advertised. So once we found out, there wasn't actually an opportunity there. And so Sarah and I decided to stay here in the States. We decided to stay in Chicago. So I called the district superintendent in Detroit and I said, are there any churches left? No. She had already moved all the pastors around. There were no churches available, or at least no churches that I would have been suited for. And so I graduated seminary last summer with nothing. No church, no overseas travels, nothing. So I got a job, bagging groceries. I had bills to pay. I had a master's degree, but I was bagging groceries. I was frustrated. God, why would you show me that picture? Why would you give me that dream of being a missionary if you were just going to close all those doors? What the heck, man? I was frustrated. I spent my summer last year bagging groceries. Until I got a phone call. And it was just a random phone call from the pastor at the church that I used to be interning at while I was in school. I'd already said my goodbyes. I hadn't talked to them in months. She just called me randomly. She thought maybe I'm out of the country. That was the last they heard from me. I was leaving the country. But she had a graduation card she wanted to send to me. So she was just calling to get my address. And so I explained, no, actually, I'm still here. I'm in the States. I'm actually still in Chicago. And, I gave her my address and she sent me the card, and that was sort of the end of the phone call. That weekend, the full-time youth pastor at that church resigned. She got another job that was better. It had better benefits, and she was looking towards having a family and all that sort of thing, so that was an important move for her. And suddenly the church was in crisis. They needed a youth pastor now. This is 3 weeks before Rally Day. This is right before the fall schedule. They needed someone. So I got another phone call. And I said, all right, I will be your youth pastor temporarily, because in the spring, I'm getting to church. But I gave them 9 months. I said, you have 9 months to find someone. I can help you that much. And so I went to help them. And I had an amazing time, and they found someone 3 weeks before I left. I had already come and visited here. I was already appointed here. I had already booked the moving van. I was leaving. And they found someone 3 weeks before. And the rest is history. But that is a lot of coincidences for one little story. I mean, think about it. I'm from Detroit. And they did all the movement for pastors in the Detroit area the year I graduated. If I had not said, don't, I'd be working in a church in Detroit right now. If I hadn't said, don't, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have been able to help Downers Grove, the church that needed my help. My wife wouldn't have found her job working in Chinatown and downtown, which she loved. We had a great time in those 9 months. I wouldn't be here. You all would have a completely different pastor. I think you're allowed to say coincidence like one time in a story, and then you have to start admitting that there's something more going on here. Last week, we started a new sermon series called Stories of Love, a walk through the Old Testament. And we talked about the story of Moses and how God acted in fantastic and amazing ways to help Israel escape slavery. Now this week we're going to talk about the story of Esther. Esther's a story of incredible courage, but God's actions in Esther are very different. It's very subtle. In fact, scholars criticize the book of Esther because it never mentions God directly at all. The whole book. They never say the word God. They never say his name. It's all implied. It's indirect. There's no burning bushes or the parting of the Red Sea in this story. It's a story of remarkable coincidences. Maybe it's a story to show us that there are no coincidences. Our story starts with a king and his queen, and the king throws a party. He has maybe a little bit too much to drink. And he calls for the queen and says, "Come on out, I want everybody to know how beautiful you are." And the queen refuses. And given the relations between men and women at that time, plus the fact that this guy's the king, I don't think his behavior is that surprising. Men have a tremendous capacity for idiocy, especially when they've been drinking. We all know any story that starts with, "Here, hold my beer." It's not going to end well. And so the queen refuses, but what does surprise me is just how angry the king gets. He's so mad at the queen. He wakes up the next morning and he just gets rid of her. He calls his counselors and he's like, "What can I do to get rid of this woman?" And then he needs a new queen. So he goes on a search to find a new queen. And so it's a meeting of all the eligible girls to find his new queen. Now the hero of our story is a woman named Esther. And her cousin Mordecai adopted her when she was a child, and he raised her like his own child. So Esther is in there with an audience and the king. And Mordecai is just out waiting by the gate. And he just happens to overhear a plot to assassinate the king. And so then when Esther gets chosen to be the queen, she becomes the new queen. Mordecai tells the plot. And Esther, the new queen, just happens to be in the perfect position to warn the king. What a coincidence. And so the king is saved. He doesn't get assassinated. And they write it down in the history books, and it's wonderful. And then we introduce our bad guy, Haman. Haman is a very important official. He's used to people bowing down to him. He's a very important official in the king's court. Mordecai is a Jewish guy, and Jews do not bow down to anyone except God. That's one of the very strict rules. It's the first commandment. You shall not have anyone before God. Right? So he wouldn't bow down. And so when Mordecai doesn't bow down, Haman gets so mad. He's furious, but he's not just mad at Mordecai. He gets so angry, he's like, "You know what, I'm just going to wipe out all Jews everywhere." I think that's the dictionary definition of overreaction. So he convinces the king to sign an edict to kill all the Jewish people. In 1 year, they're going to kill all the Jewish people. Now that's really bad news for Mordecai and Esther. So Mordecai goes to Esther and he says, "You've got to talk to the king. You have to show him what Haman has done." But there's a catch. If you approach the king and you weren't called on and you talk to the king, he can, if he wants, have you beheaded. It's not a very welcoming environment. The only thing that can save you at that point is if the king lowers his scepter. If he lowers his scepter, then you're allowed to continue talking and you don't lose your head. So Esther knows what she has to do, but it's scary. It's extremely dangerous. So Esther invites the king and Haman over for dinner. She has them over for dinner, and she asks the king, "I need a favor." And the king says, "Sure, you're my beautiful wife. Anything you want, I'll ask you." But then she gets a little freaked out. She gets scared. She backs out. She says, "The request is that you come back tomorrow for dinner again. Let's have dinner again tomorrow." Now, at this point in the story, Haman, he's like on cloud 9. He's doing great. He just had a private dinner with the king and the queen, and he got invited to the next one the next night. He's doing great. But the idea that Mordecai is still out there not bowing down to him, it sort of spoils his mood. He's still grumpy about it. So it's a little twisted, but he builds a gallows. He builds a noose for Mordecai. And he's going to go the next morning, and he's going to go talk to the king and say, "Let's get Mordecai killed. Let's get him dead first." That night, the king can't fall asleep. He tosses and he turns and he just can't fall asleep. I love this part of the story because he has the book of records brought in. He tells his servant, "Hey, bring in the book of records." There's a book, it contains all the history, all the commendations, all the political decisions, everything that they do, all in one book called the book of records. And he has the servants bring that in because nothing is more boring then politics. You need help falling asleep? Let's get that book of records in here. Just read him some of that. That'll put him right to sleep. But they start to read from the book of records, and they stumble across the story of Mordecai saving the king. What a coincidence. So the next morning, the king is determined to honor Mordecai. That's his goal. He's like, I gotta honor this guy who saved my life. And Haman walks in, determined to get Mordecai killed. What a coincidence. And so, it's kind of a tangent. If you don't know what to get someone for their birthday, you should ask them, well, what do you think I got you for your birthday? And they'll be like, well, maybe you got me this or this or this, and boom, 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 there's your shopping list. Brilliant. This is what the king does to Haman. All right, he says to Haman, what would you do to honor someone? And Haman thinks, oh, he's talking about me. We know he's talking about Mordecai, but Haman doesn't realize that. He's like, oh, he's talking about me. So Haman goes on and on. He's like, oh, I'd give him a parade, give him a brand new robe, get him a crown, get somebody to walk around in front of him and just say how great he is. And so the king says, great, go do that for Mordecai. Haman is about to have a very bad day. So he spends the whole day celebrating Mordecai, and then he goes to dinner at night with the king and the queen. And we all know what happens from them. Esther, she throws herself on the ground before the king, and she says, look, and she tells him what Haman has done. And the king lowers his scepter. He allows her to speak. And then she tells him what Haman has done, and Haman ends up getting hung on the gallows he built for Mordecai. This is a story of ironic comedy. It's actually a really funny story. It's designed to make us laugh on purpose. Ironic comedy. It's also a story of remarkable coincidences. What a coincidence that Esther freaks out that first night. She gets nervous, she gets scared. And then what a coincidence that that night is the night the king can't sleep. And then what a coincidence that the story they just happened to read is the one of Mordecai being honored. And then what a coincidence that the first guy who walks in the door in the morning is Haman. You see a trend, right? They never mention God's name. But that's an awful lot of coincidences for one little old story. Or maybe there are no coincidences. Maybe we're supposed to see the workings of a divine design. Now last week, with the story of Moses, we talked about how just how epic and awesome God was. We realized that God is in control of everything. But we also saw that God likes to work through people. He works through us. And this story, our story of Esther, is a story of incredible courage, but it also shows us that sometimes God speaks with silence. Let me say that again. Sometimes God speaks with silence. Sometimes God acts by doing nothing, by letting us do something. Sometimes God teaches us something by not saying anything at all. God empowers us. In the story of Moses, we saw that God was powerful. We know God is awesome. But in this story, God gives that power to you. He gives that power to us. There are moments in life. There are moments in life when we're waiting for God to fix something. We see a problem out in the world and we're like, God, why aren't you fixing that? Why haven't you taken care of that? Well, maybe God's waiting for you to go fix it. There's a reason for his silence. He's waiting for us. He has given us this power. A few weeks ago, we talked about the Beatitudes and the Revelations. We talked about how Scripture tells us how the end of the world's going to look. The Bible tells us, it paints us this beautiful picture of a world where there's not any more crying, no more pain, no more death, no more tears. It's awesome. And a long time ago, people used to read that verse, and they'd think, all I got to do is wait. I just need to believe the right stuff and wait for God. He's going to come out of the sky, and he's going to fix everything. And maybe he will. He's God. He certainly could if he wanted to. But I read the Bible, and I look at these stories, and I got to figure that's not how God acts, or has acted in the past. God likes to act through people. Maybe, just maybe, this is our job. We need to make that perfect picture a reality. Now maybe we can't get it perfect all by ourselves, but we can sure as heck try. We can get real close. Esther's a story that a lot of people like to criticize. People criticize it for all sorts of reasons. The name of God's not in it. That means it's less holy somehow. People criticize her because she works inside a really corrupt system. This is a very sexist, masochistic system. And she operates inside of it. People criticize her for that. People criticize her because she gets bossed around by her cousin Mordecai a little bit too much. People criticize her for this and for that. But the truth is, Esther did the best she could with the tools she had. That's something for us to learn. When we face a problem in this world, if it looks too big, if it's too huge, we just hands off. Can't do it. Nothing to do about that. But we have to do what we can with the gifts that we have. Here's a huge example. This church, we cannot, by ourselves, with all our talents and resources, you guys are awesome. You're a very talented church, and I'm happy to be a part of it. But we can't solve the drug problem of Marquette County all by ourselves. If you haven't seen the news stories, turn on the TV, they're all over the place. But if you haven't seen the stories, apparently this county, something this county is becoming more and more known for, is a drug called meth. Our youth, our young people are starting to refer to that drug as what this area is known for. Yikes. Now we can't tackle that all by ourselves. We can't take on that problem all by ourselves, but we sure as heck can try. We need to do what we can with the tools we have. Another huge example is teenage pregnancy. We're not going to solve that problem all by ourselves. We are not going to eradicate teenagers making bad decisions. But we sure as heck can try. We can do the best we can with the tools we have. And that's an issue that we can actually come at from a lot of different angles. So we do what we can with the tools we have. There are things out there that seem too big for us to challenge. They are the giants of our minds. But here's the thing, nothing is impossible for God. I love saying that. Let me say it again. Nothing is impossible for God. God is awesome. We saw that last week. Sometimes we just have to do the best we can with the tools we have. We have to tear down our giants piece by piece. Now here's where the rubber hits the road. When it comes to the stuff we have, if we do not use it, we will lose it. Luke chapter 16, verse 10 tells us, if you take what little you've got and you do a good job with it, if you manage your resources well, more will be given to you. But if you don't, even what little you have is going to be taken away from you. If you do not use it, you're going to lose it. Our scripture lesson from John 15 puts it in terms of plants on a vine. If you've got a dead branch on a tree, if you're a gardener, you know that that branch is sucking the life out of that tree. You need to trim it. If it's a dead branch, you need to trim it. This directly applies to our relationship with God. Maybe I can explain it like this. How many of you have junk in your house? Yeah. We've all got some junk, right? So when you're going through your attic or your basement or your garage or whatever, how do you decide what's important and what's junk? By whether you use it or not, right? You're going through the basement, the Christmas decorations are there, you use those every year, so keep those. But that treadmill that's in the corner covered in 5 boxes and hasn't been used in 30 years, that's probably garbage. If we do not use it, we're going to lose it. If we are a dead branch on the vine, if we're not actually attached to God, we're going to get trimmed. Now, notice, this does not say you have to succeed in everything you do. All right, you're not going to single-handedly solve all the problems of the world. It's okay to fail. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we goof up and we're going to fail. The church fails all the time. That's awesome. Failure is an amazing thing. You know why? Because it means at least you tried. I would choose to be a part of a church that fails over a church that does nothing every single day of the week. Again and again, we learn from our mistakes and we get better. I don't want to fail. Let me say that. I don't want to. But if we do, that's fine. Pick ourselves back up and try again. Now, when I teach this story to children, It all comes down to one thing, sort of a story of standing up against bullying. If you haven't heard the news stories, one of the largest things that our children face in schools now is bullying. It's huge. Right? So we need to teach our children to fight that. Esther stood up against a bully. And so we can teach our children that they can stand up against bullies. Kids are mean. They can be really mean. But here's the secret. This is going to blow your minds. Adults can be mean too. I know, right? Children have to face bullies. They have to stand up against these things. Yes, absolutely. But so do we. We as Christians, as adults, we have to stand up against bullies. Being an adult doesn't mean you can't be a bully. Being an adult means you've had a lot more practice being a bully. There are bullies out there that we as Christians need to stand up to. I've already mentioned some of the giants that we face in the real world, the drugs and the teen pregnancy thing. These are things we need to stand up against. Now I want to talk about 3 different bullies, real quick to finish the sermon. I want to talk about 3 different bullies that we face as Christians. The first bully is perception. The bully of perception. There is an image of what a Christian is supposed to be in the back of all of our minds. There's an idea of this perfect person. Are any of you like that picture? No. But we have this idea that in this place you have to be perfect. All right? We try to seem perfect in this place, but it's all fake. Pretending to be perfect can be a bully to those who are visitors in our area. It causes us to try and hide our troubles, try to cover up our imperfections. Oh, don't let the people at church find out I made a mistake. They might figure out I'm human. One example is the teenage pregnancy thing. I can't think of a better place to find love and support for those young women than in the church. Why aren't they here? They're scared. They are terrified of us. They're worried about the judgmental glances, the dirty looks that they get from people in the church. They won't come back, and we need them to be here. We need to love them into a better life. Now, let's be careful about what I'm saying. I am not enabling. I am not saying we want a blind acceptance of all the mistakes that people make in their life. All right, we can love them into a better life. We can look at someone and say, hey, you've made mistakes, me too. But I can still love you, and together we can get you into a better life place. They are being bullied by our perception of perfection. We can't help them if we don't start with love. There's a Christian poet, I can't remember his name, but there's a Christian poet who came up with this line. He says, the church is not meant to be a museum for perfect people. The church is designed to be a hospital for the broken. We could be doctors and nurses in this hospital. We could be helping people. We just go out and get our patients. The second bully is the present. There is a belief that things will always be the way they are. We are stuck. They've always been that way, so they're always going to be that way. We are stuck in the present. We are bullied by the belief that you are powerless. You are not powerless. Let me say that again. You are not powerless. You are only stuck so long as you believe that you are stuck. This is the whole message of Esther. This is the whole point. If you guys were sleeping, wake it up. Bring it in. Bring it in. God empowers you. You are not powerless. You can stand up against these things. God enables you to do great things. With God's help, we can overcome the struggles of the present to make a better future. We are only stuck as long as we believe that we are stuck. And I don't believe it. Now, the third bully may surprise you. The first one was the perception of perfection. This idea that we're supposed to put on a face when we come to church. The second one was our present, the idea that we are stuck. The third big bully is the past. This is a town with an amazing past. Some of you were even here for it. You remember what it was like back in the heyday. You know what it means to say that Ishpeming was thriving. You know what it looked like when it was booming. One of the greatest things in life is the ability to sit around with your friends and remember good old days gone by. That's awesome. But we need to remember the role of the past. The past is our guide, not our goal. We're not trying to move backwards. It's our guide. Right? We should use the wisdom and the knowledge of the past to enable a better future. Ishpeming, Nagani, Marquette, and all the rest of them, they're never going to be what they were. We're never going to be what we used to be, and that's okay. That opens us up for a whole new world of possibilities, a whole new direction for thriving. With every new day, with each new generation, we have new opportunities for thriving. We should use the past to guide us. We are being bullied by the perfection of the past into believing it's never going to be that way. There's this temptation to let the success of the past paralyze the present and cut off any hope of the future. When all we do is sit around bemoaning how it used to be, we're never going to improve. We need to let the past be the past and use that to guide us into a better future. So may we have the courage of Esther. May we stand up to the bullies, the giants that face each and every one of us. May we stand up to them and do what we can with what we have. Our God is an awesome, awesome God. And He has given you the power to change the world. Amen.